Now, we have learned that the cell address is made up of an intersection between the column heading and the row number. And this cell address can either be referred to as a relative cell address or an absolute cell address. If you look at the example on the screen here, you will see the difference between a relative cell address and an absolute cell address. A relative cell address will only have the column heading and the row number, whereas an absolute cell address will have the column heading and the row number preceded by a $sign. Secondly, the difference between relative and absolute cell addressing is that when you use relative cell addressing in a formula and you copy the formula to other cells, the cell address is going to change. Whereas when you use an absolute cell address, the cell address is going to remain the same throughout, therefore representing a constant value. In this example, we are looking at a rated employee salary that is going to allow us to demonstrate the use of relative and absolute cell addresses. Now, since this seems like a complex example, I'm just going to briefly explain some of these columns that I have here. What's happening in this example is we have employees that have worked for hours, some hours. Now, in order for us to pay their salaries, we are going to calculate, first of all, their gross pay, which is to take the number of hours that they worked and multiply that by the rate per hour. That will give us the gross pay, from which the tax amount will be subtracted, so that the result of that will be their net pay, which is the actual money that is paid to the employee. Okay, now that we understand, let's begin. To calculate gross pay, I'm just going to run through this quickly. Of course, we are going to enter a formula, a simple formula, that is to say equal sign, since we're entering a formula. Okay, for the first employee, we are going to take the number of hours worked, which is 3 in C5. Then we'll multiply that by the rate per hour, which is in F2. Okay, press enter. There we go. Now, we are going to copy our formula, but I want you to notice one thing. The formula I've used here, I've referred to the cell using relative cell addresses, which means when I copy this formula down, the column and the row headings are going to change. Okay? Make sure you can notice that. We'll see in a while how that happens. Okay, I've got an error here which says value. Yes. Even better that I got an error, because then this is incorrect. I needed to use exactly the same value here. Oh, great. So how do we solve this? What was happening is when I drag the formula down, it's changing, it keeps changing the column header and the row header. So somewhere along the line, this error would mean there was a multiplication with a non-numeric value, and I'm guessing it's this one. So how do I solve that? It means I need to make use of absolute cell address, so that I can keep multiplying with this same number every time. How do I do that? I simply change my formula. How do I change my formula? I double click in this cell, in the cell where I entered the formula, and let's remove that. We click on the constant, the value that we want to keep a constant. Then we press F4 on our keyboard. Doing that gives us an absolute cell address that is $F $2, which means neither the column F nor the row 2 should change throughout our calculations. Let's press enter. We get the same answer. And when we drag that down now, we should solve the problem. Oh, great. Yes. This means that although the cell address on the left side changed from C5 to C6 in the next cell, then to C7, C8, and C9, the cell address on the right remained the same. Let's have a look. In this one is $F $2 remains the same there, and that is throughout. Okay, that's one side of the story. Let's continue. We should calculate the text amount. I hope you're seeing the difference between relative and absolute cell addressing here already. Let's go on. How do you calculate the text amount? The text amount is to take the gross pay and multiply it by the tax rate. Okay, so it's just a simple formula, equal sign. We say what is the gross pay? Is that one. Okay, tax rate. We are supposed to multiply tax rate. Do you think this formula is correct? I think we're going to have the same problem if we don't change it to absolute, right? Yes. So, but let's try. Let's do that. That works. But what if we copy it down? We have a similar problem, if not the same problem. So just like the way we solved the previous one, we go back to our formula and make sure that F3, which refers to the tax rate, which remains the same throughout, must be changed to absolute. And you do that by pressing F4 on your keyboard. Yes, we have $sign there. Gives us the same value, yes, but that should solve the rest of the cells. Great. Now we should calculate the net pay, which I think is not going to require any absolute. I think here it's going to be the difference between gross pay and tax amount. So it's going to be gross pay minus tax amount, and that's it. And I don't think we need any absolute cell reference here. And we can just copy that down. Great, don't mind the numbers. The most important thing is for us to realize the importance of using an absolute or a relative cell reference or knowing when to use either of the two. Now, how does this help us? Suppose you're working in a big spreadsheet that takes the constant and uses it in many places, or say in many cells. For example, what if the tax rate increased from 6% to 7.5%? That would mean we need to go to each cell and change that. Suppose we were using the constant as a value instead of keeping it here. Then we're going to come here and say C5 multiplied by 7.5%. And we need to do that for all the cells. However, since we have a constant that we can use as an absolute cell reference, we simply need to come and change this value from 6 to 7.5%. Then that is going to affect all the cells where the tax rate was used, or where this cell was referred to as an absolute cell. If we press enter, you should notice all the values changing there. Oh, not quite. I think I sort of entered something. Yeah, I was supposed to use a comma. Yes. This is just rounded off, but I can solve it there. Yes, I actually meant 7.5%. Or the rate per hour could still also change. Maybe there's an increase in the rate. Instead of it being 355, now it's changed to 360. Okay, that should also change all our values, which means you can effect a change from a central point. That's the advantage of using absolute cell reference and keeping a value or the constant value as in a separate cell. Now you understand the difference between relative cell addressing and absolute cell addressing and when to use relative or absolute cell address.